There is a pattern many chosen ones begin noticing once they start healing and developing stronger awareness of themselves. At first, the pattern feels confusing. You begin realizing that certain people repeatedly push small lines that should have been obvious boundaries. It might appear as a joke that crosses into disrespect, a last-minute demand that assumes your time belongs to them, or a subtle comment that challenges your dignity while pretending to be harmless. The behavior may not look extreme at first, which is why it often goes unnoticed in the early stages. But over time, something becomes clear. The same individuals continue pushing those lines again and again, watching carefully to see how you respond. When a chosen one begins recognizing this cycle, the question naturally arises: why do people keep testing your limits? The answer is rarely random. In fact, these tests function almost like a form of social data collection. People are constantly reading signals from each other about what behavior will be tolerated and what behavior will not. When someone crosses a small line, they are not only expressing their personality, they are observing your reaction to gather information about your standards. Every response you give teaches them something about the rules of interacting with you. This is why the tests often begin with small actions rather than dramatic conflicts. A small disrespect allows them to measure how sensitive you are to the line being crossed. A late request reveals whether your schedule is something they must respect or something they can rearrange whenever they want. A dismissive comment reveals whether you will defend your boundaries or laugh it off in order to avoid tension. The chosen one eventually realizes that these moments are not accidents. They are experiments. Many people conduct these experiments unconsciously, but the purpose remains the same. They want to locate the boundaries that define your standards.
When someone tests you, they are essentially asking a silent question. How much can I get away with? If the chosen one has not yet developed strong boundaries, the pattern often continues for years without interruption. The individual who pushes the line learns that nothing serious happens when the line is crossed. Perhaps you correct them politely once, but then allow the relationship to continue exactly as before. Perhaps you explain why their behavior hurt you, but your continued availability communicates that the consequence was temporary. Over time, this creates a confusing dynamic where you feel disrespected or the other person feels comfortable repeating the same behavior. From their perspective, the system appears to work. But as healing begins, something changes in the chosen one's perception of these patterns. The same behaviors that once felt merely irritating now appear as signals, revealing the true structure of the relationship. You begin noticing the difference between genuine mistakes and repeated boundary tests. Genuine mistakes usually involve someone correcting their behavior once they understand the impact. Boundary tests involve repetition. The same line is crossed again after it was already explained. The same pressure appears even after you clarified your availability. The same emotional expectation returns even after you communicated that your energy is limited. These repeated moments reveal that the behavior is no longer about misunderstanding. It is about measurement. Many chosen ones initially respond to these tests with self-doubt. They worry that they are becoming too sensitive or too rigid. After all, the people around them may describe the situation as harmless humor or casual behavior. But healing often increases your sensitivity to disrespect, not because you are becoming fragile, but because you are becoming calibrated.
Calcula means your internal compass begins recognizing subtle differences between healthy interaction and emotional overreach. The same comment that once felt normal now feels slightly misaligned. The same request that once felt reasonable now feels like an assumption rather than a question. This awareness is not a weakness. It is the natural result of understanding your own value more clearly. The chosen one learns that boundaries are not designed to create distance for no reason. They exist to protect the environments where respect can grow. When boundaries are unclear, Relationships often drift into patterns where one person slowly gives more, or the other slowly takes more. Testing becomes the mechanism through which that imbalance expands. The person pushing the limits learns that your kindness will continue, even when respect becomes inconsistent. But the moment you begin recognizing these patterns, the entire dynamic starts shifting. Instead of interpreting the behavior emotionally, you begin reading it as information. Each test reveals something about the person conducting it. It reveals how they approach power, access, and responsibility in relationships. Some people test because they want control. Others test because they want convenience. A few test because your stability triggers their insecurity, and they need to confirm that they still have influence over you. Understanding these motivations allows the chosen one to respond with clarity instead of confusion. The goal is not to react with anger or dramatic confrontation. The goal is to see the pattern clearly enough that you no longer misinterpret it. Once you recognize that testing is simply an attempt to measure your standards, the response becomes much simpler. You stop explaining endlessly and start communicating limits through consistent behavior. And as you continue learning about these patterns, the deeper reasons behind these tests begin revealing themselves. Because most people who push boundaries are not acting randomly. They are trying to answer a question that matters to them far more than you might realize. They are trying to determine how much influence they can have over your time, your energy, and the life you are building. Once the chosen one begins recognizing that people test limits as a way of collecting information, the next step is understanding the motivations behind those tests. Most boundary-pushing behavior can be traced back to three core desires that quietly shape human interactions: the desire for control, the desire for access, and the desire for convenience. These motivations often operate beneath the surface of normal conversations, which is why they can go unnoticed for a long time. People rarely announce that they want control over someone else. They rarely admit they are testing how much they can take without giving the same level of respect in return. Instead, the behavior appears in small patterns that repeat themselves until the dynamic becomes obvious. The first reason people test your limits is control without responsibility. Control in relationships does not always appear as domination or aggression. In many situations, it appears through emotional influence. When someone learns that your reactions are predictable, they gain a subtle form of leverage. If they know certain words will trigger you, they can guide the conversation in whatever direction they want, simply by pressing that emotional button. Over time, this allows them to steer your behavior indirectly. If you become upset easily, they can provoke you whenever they want to regain the upper hand in a disagreement. If you feel guilty quickly, they can use disappointment to push you into doing things you did not originally intend to do. This is why reactions become valuable to someone seeking control. Every emotional reaction provides information about how to influence your next decision.
The chosen one eventually realizes that the more emotionally reactive a person becomes, the easier they are to steer. When you respond immediately to every provocation, the person testing you learns exactly how to shape your behavior in the future. But when healing reduces those reactions, the leverage disappears. Without emotional movement to guide them, the person attempting to control the dynamic suddenly feels uncertain about where they stand. The second reason people test your limits is access. Not everyone who enters your life is drawn to your personality alone. Some are drawn to what you carry. Every individual possesses forms of value that extend beyond money or visible success. Stability is valuable. Emotional intelligence is valuable. Loyalty, kindness, wisdom, and supportive energy are all forms of resources that other people may seek. The chosen one often carries a combination of these qualities, which makes them naturally attractive to individuals looking for support systems in their own lives. But attraction to what you provide is not always the same as appreciation for who you are. Some people remain close to you because your presence gives them something they need. Perhaps you listen patiently to their problems, Perhaps your encouragement gives them confidence when they feel uncertain. Perhaps your network or opportunities provide connections they could not easily access on their own. In healthy relationships, these exchanges occur with balance and mutual respect. But in unhealthy dynamics, the person receiving the benefits becomes focused on maintaining access rather than maintaining the relationship itself. Testing boundaries becomes the way they measure how secure that access really is. If they can speak disrespectfully without consequences, they learn that access remains open even when respect is inconsistent. If they can disappear for long periods and return expecting your full attention, they learn that your time is always available whenever they choose to reconnect. The test is simple but revealing. They are asking whether the value you provide comes with standards or whether it can be accessed freely without responsibility. The third reason people test your limits is convenience. Boundaries introduce effort into relationships. When clear standards exist, people must adjust their behavior in order to maintain the connection. They must communicate respectfully, honor your time, and recognize that your energy is not unlimited. For individuals who prefer convenience, these expectations feel inconvenient. They would rather interact with someone whose boundaries are flexible or undefined. A person without clear boundaries becomes easy to engage with because the relationship requires very little adjustment. Plans can change at the last moment without consequence. Emotional dumping can happen without asking whether the other person has the capacity to listen. Disrespectful comments can be disguised as humor because the response will likely be laughter rather than correction. When someone values convenience more than mutual respect, testing becomes a way to determine whether you are an easy person to keep around. Each boundary they push represents a question. Can they speak to you in whatever tone they choose? Can they disappear when it suits them and return expecting the same level of closeness? Can they unload their problems onto you while offering little support in return? If the chosen one responds to these behaviors with silence, tolerance, or nervous laughter, the test appears successful. The person learns that maintaining the relationship requires little effort on their part. But when healing strengthens your awareness, the pattern begins breaking down. The chosen one stops interpreting these tests as isolated incidents and starts seeing them as signals revealing someone's intentions. Each test becomes a question waiting for an answer, and the answer is rarely given through long explanations. It is given through consistent behavior that shows exactly how much access, control, and convenience someone is allowed to have in your life. As the chosen one begins recognizing patterns of control, access, and convenience, another layer of boundary testing becomes visible. Some people do not push your limits simply because they want something from you. Instead, they push because your presence triggers something inside them that feels uncomfortable. Your stability, your calm, and your self-awareness can quietly challenge the way certain individuals see themselves. When this happens, testing your limits becomes a way for them to restore a sense of emotional balance. The fourth reason people test your boundaries is insecurity triggered by your calm. A healed or self-aware person operates differently from someone who is still driven by emotional chaos. When you are calm, your reactions become slower, more measured, and less predictable. This makes manipulation far more difficult. Many people are used to interacting in environments where emotional reactions determine the outcome of conversations. Whoever gets the strongest reaction often gains the most influence in the moment. But when a chosen one stops reacting impulsively, that familiar system begins breaking down. Your calm introduces a kind of silence into situations that used to rely on emotional noise. For individuals who depend on emotional dominance to feel powerful, this silence can feel threatening. They may interpret your calm not as maturity, but as resistance. To them, your quiet presence feels like a refusal to participate in the structure they understand.
This is why some people begin testing you more aggressively once they notice that you remain steady under pressure. They may make sharper jokes, more direct criticisms,
or more obvious attempts to provoke a reaction. The purpose of this behavior is not always to harm you intentionally. In many cases, it is an unconscious attempt to restore the emotional hierarchy they are used to. If they can provoke you into reacting, they regain the familiar sense of influence that your calm disrupted. The chosen one often notices that these individuals appear strangely energized by discomfort. They may smile when you seem unsettled, or become more persistent when you remain polite rather than confrontational. This behavior reveals that the interaction is no longer about the original topic of conversation. It has become a test of emotional control. The person pushing the boundary is trying to confirm that they still have the ability to move you emotionally. When your calm remains intact, their insecurity becomes more visible because the dominance they relied on no longer works. The fifth reason people test your limits is ego and the desire to prove something. Human social dynamics often include subtle hierarchies where individuals compete for influence, respect, or recognition within a group. In these environments, testing boundaries becomes a way to establish position. If someone can cross your line without consequences, they interpret that moment as evidence that they hold a higher position in the social dynamic. This behavior becomes especially visible in group settings. A person may challenge you publicly, make a disrespectful joke, or question your decision in front of others. The goal is rarely the topic itself. The goal is to observe your reaction while others are watching. If you respond with hesitation, embarrassment, or nervous laughter, the person testing you interprets it as confirmation that they can control the emotional tone of the situation. Their ego receives reinforcement from the perception that they successfully crossed your boundary without resistance. When this happens repeatedly, the behavior may escalate because the individual becomes more confident in their ability to dominate the interaction. But if the chosen one responds with quiet firmness instead of emotional defensiveness, the dynamic changes immediately. Calm boundaries interrupt the performance they were trying to create. Instead of gaining status through your reaction, they encounter someone who refuses to participate in the hierarchy they were attempting to establish. This is why boundary tests often increase before they disappear. Once someone realizes that the chosen one has developed stronger standards, they may attempt a few final tests to see if the old version of you still exists somewhere beneath the surface. They remember the earlier seasons when you explained yourself repeatedly, apologized quickly, or tolerated behavior that made you uncomfortable. The tests become a search for that familiar version of you. But healing changes the chosen one in ways that cannot easily be reversed. The patience remains, but it is now balanced with discernment. The kindness remains, but it is now protected by standards. And the calm that once looked like vulnerability becomes the strongest signal of all. Because not everyone who pushes your boundaries is brave. Some are simply unhealed individuals trying to prove power in places where respect should have been enough. As the chosen one becomes more aware of why people test limits, another important realization begins to emerge. Many boundary tests are not only about control, access, or ego. They are also about measurement. People observe your reactions over time to determine how much self-worth you carry and how consistent your standards truly are. Human behavior adapts quickly to patterns, and in relationships, those patterns often become the unspoken rules that guide interaction.
The sixth reason people test your boundaries is to detect your level of self-worth. Whether consciously or not, people learn how to treat you based on what you repeatedly tolerate. When someone crosses a line and nothing changes afterward, the message they receive is simple. The line was not as serious as it appeared. This is why inconsistency invites repeated testing. A chosen one may communicate a boundary clearly one day, but if the same behavior happens again and the relationship continues without consequence, the boundary loses its meaning. Words alone cannot train behavior. Only consistent responses create the structure that defines how people engage with you. In the earlier seasons of life, many chosen ones struggled with this dynamic because they valued harmony more than enforcement. They might say that certain behavior is unacceptable, but when the moment arrives again,
they laugh it off or continue the conversation as if nothing happened. The intention behind this response is often kindness or a desire to avoid conflict, but the result is confusion. The other person receives two signals at the same time. One signal says the behavior is unacceptable. The other signal says the relationship will continue exactly the same regardless of what happened. When those signals conflict, most people follow the one that protects their own convenience. Over time, the behavior repeats because the test produced no meaningful consequence. The chosen one eventually learns that boundaries require alignment between words and actions. If someone repeatedly crosses a line after it has been communicated, the response must change the environment of the relationship. This does not require anger or dramatic confrontation. It requires clarity. The moment someone sees that a boundary leads to real adjustment, less access, less attention, or distance, the test stops providing useful information. Without reward, the behavior loses its purpose. The seventh reason people test your limits is because they are searching for the old version of you. When someone has known you for a long time, they carry a mental image of how you typically respond in difficult situations. Perhaps the old version of you explained your feelings repeatedly, hoping the other person would finally understand. Perhaps you apologized quickly to maintain peace, even when you were not responsible for the conflict. Perhaps you tolerated certain behaviors simply because you valued the relationship more than your own comfort. These patterns create expectations that become deeply embedded in the way people interact with you. When healing begins transforming the chosen one, those expectations no longer match reality. Suddenly, the person who used to explain everything becomes quieter. The person who once apologized quickly now pauses before accepting blame. The person who tolerated disrespect begins responding with calm limits. For individuals who are accustomed to the earlier dynamic, this change feels unfamiliar. They may assume the shift is temporary, or that the old version of you will eventually return if they push the right buttons. Testing becomes their way of running what could be called compatibility checks. They cross the line slightly to see if you respond the way you used to. If you return to over-explaining or apologizing, they interpret it as confirmation that the old dynamic still exists. But if the chosen one responds with consistent boundaries, the compatibility test produces a different answer. The relationship must now operate under new conditions. This is why clarity becomes essential during this stage. The chosen one protocol for handling these tests is simple but powerful. First, name the behavior once in a calm and direct way. This communicates that the line has been recognized. Second, identify the consequence that will occur if the behavior continues. This creates a clear structure for the interaction moving forward. Third, enforce the consequence the moment the behavior repeats. Without enforcement, the boundary returns to being only a suggestion. Finally, adjust access rather than continuing endless arguments. Reducing availability often communicates seriousness more effectively than long explanations. The chosen one learns that boundaries do not require emotional intensity to be effective. Simple statements delivered calmly can reshape the entire dynamic of a relationship. When someone hears that something does not work for you, that you are not available for a certain behavior, or that a conversation will continue only if it remains respectful, the message becomes clear without unnecessary drama. Boundaries are not negotiations with emotional people. They are decisions about the conditions under which you allow access to your life. And once those conditions become consistent, the testing begins to lose its purpose entirely. As the chosen one continues healing and becoming more aware of relational dynamics, something interesting begins happening. The tests that once felt confusing start becoming obvious. In the past, when someone crossed a line, you might have spent hours wondering whether you misunderstood the situation. You might have questioned your own instincts, asking yourself if you were being too sensitive or reacting too strongly. But once your awareness sharpens, those moments look different.
You begin recognizing the pattern immediately. The joke that carries disrespect, the request that assumes your time is unlimited, the person who pushes a little further each time to see if the rules have changed. Instead of feeling confused, you begin reading these situations as signals. And one of the most important signals the chosen one learns to recognize is this: tests often increase right before access is removed.
When someone senses that your boundaries are becoming stronger, they often push one more time to see if the old version of you still exists somewhere beneath the surface. They remember the seasons when you tolerated more, explained more, and forgave faster than was healthy for you. They remember the version of you that believed patience alone could transform someone's behavior. So they run one more test. Sometimes it appears small, like a casual remark that crosses a line you already addressed. Sometimes it appears larger, like a repeated action that ignores everything you previously communicated. But the purpose remains the same. They are trying to determine whether your standards are permanent or temporary. This is why the chosen one eventually stops interpreting these moments emotionally and starts interpreting them strategically. When someone tests you, they are not measuring your kindness, they are measuring your standards. Kindness without standards invites people to take more than they give. Standards without kindness can create unnecessary conflict. But when the two exist together, they form something powerful: self-respect. The chosen one begins understanding that boundaries are not acts of hostility, they are acts of clarity. They communicate the conditions under which your energy, attention, and presence are available. When those conditions are ignored, the response is not emotional escalation. The response is adjustment. Access changes. Conversations become shorter. Distance appears where familiarity once existed. Over time, the people around you begin recognizing that your boundaries are not temporary reactions. They are permanent structures guiding your life. And when that realization settles in, the testing gradually stops. Some individuals adapt to the new dynamic and begin interacting with greater respect. Others quietly remove themselves because the relationship no longer provides the same convenience or control it once did. The chosen one learns to accept both outcomes without resentment. Because the purpose of boundaries is not to punish people. The purpose is to reveal compatibility. The people who respect your limits will remain. The people who relied on your lack of limits will disappear. And in that separation, something important becomes clear. Every test you experienced was part of your upgrade. Those moments forced you to recognize where your standards needed strengthening. They revealed the difference between patience and self-abandonment. They taught you that protecting your peace does not require anger or dramatic confrontation. It only requires consistency. By the time the chosen one reaches this stage, the lesson becomes simple and powerful. You do not need to explode to be taken seriously. Calm boundaries often speak louder than emotional reactions ever could. The moment someone realizes that access to your life depends on respect, the entire structure of the relationship changes. And from that point forward, the chosen one carries a quiet understanding that guides every interaction. Your boundary is not a wall meant to isolate you from others. It is protection that ensures the people allowed into your life are capable of meeting you with the same level of respect you offer them. If this message resonated with you, take it as confirmation that your awareness is growing. The more you heal, the more clearly you'll recognize the difference between connection and convenience. Comment "boundaries" if you're done explaining your limits and ready to live them. Remember, peace doesn't come from letting everyone in. It comes from choosing who earns access to your time, energy, and presence. Stay calm, stay consistent, and don't shrink your standards to keep people comfortable. Subscribe if you're walking the chosen one path. learning to protect your peace while still moving through life with strength, clarity, and purpose.